Okay, so with the recording having started, I am so delighted to welcome you all again. My name is Margaret Fink. I use she, her pronouns. I am sitting in my office. I'm wearing a black turtleneck and a velvety vest. Behind me is a chalkboard. My office is an old classroom and a lamp on a desk with some cinder block walls. I'm a white woman with brown hair that's kind of tied back in a bun. And I am here as the director of the Disability Cultural Center at UIC. And I'm thrilled to welcome you all to an event that we're calling Representational Conundrums, the Generative Potential of Access Conflict. And we're here with the 2024 Free Art Bodies of Work resident, Terri Lynne Hudson. And so looking forward to this conversation. If you can do emojis in the Zoom, if you want to just like clap alone wherever you are, you're welcome to do that. But I'm just thrilled to welcome Terri into this space for this conversation. And then I just want to share Bodies of Work. If you're not familiar with Bodies of Work, it is a disability arts and culture network. It's made up of 4 different organizations in the Chicago area: Access Living, Art and Culture Project, UIC's Disability and Human Development Department Program on Disability, Art, Culture, and Humanities, where Dr. Carrie Sandall works, one of our directors, the UIC Disability Cultural Center, which is where I work, and also the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, where Dr. Sandy Yee, the other director of Bodies of Work, has an institutional home. And then a bunch of disability arts and culture spaces and practitioners that we have relationships with. That is Bodies of Work. And the residency program is like some of the coolest work I get to do in my job. The idea is to offer deaf and disabled artists some dedicated time, some financial support, and community for advancing their artistry. And the way that they do that is really up to them. So part of what we're doing together today is we're going to hear a little bit from Terri about some of the things that Terri has been mulling over, some of Terri's process, some of Terri's practice. So I'm really excited. And last thing I will do before handing it over is share a bio for Terri with you all. Okay, so Terri Lynne Hudson, pronouns she, her, hers, is a disabled, chronically ill, queer actor and multidisciplinary artist and a disability rights advocate. She has a BA in general studies in the humanities, concentrating in theater, film, and dramatic literature from the University of Chicago. She has studied at Second City, Vagabond School of the Arts, and Acting Studio Chicago. She has most recently performed as part of the Shift video installation led by Barak Ade Soleil, and that was at the Museum of Contemporary Art, Chicago. She's performed via Zoom with Chaos Theater Collective, and her voice can be found reading creepy short stories on Audible and on the Random Act Scary Stories Around the Fire, Chilling Tales for Dark Night, and the Asylum Presents audio horror podcast. I feel like, Terri, can you share your creepy voice with us at some point in this whole conversation? But yeah, okay, so I'm going to send it over to Terri. I'm so excited. Take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Terri Lynne Hudson. I am a brown-skinned Black woman with mid-length dark brown hair with fading red streaks, and I'm wearing a black dress and 2-stranded beaded necklace that I made myself, and some small headphones. and I'm against a blank white background because nothing is on my green screen right now. I'm very happy to be here and very happy to share with you all today. I'm going to be talking about a few different aspects of being a disabled performer and a disabled multidisciplinary artist, and what this has made me want to share and want to make and want to do for my audience, and also some of the hurdles that I've had to deal with myself as far as access to artistic spaces. When I say representational conundrum, what I mean by that is that different access needs can often conflict with each other, and we will end up with situations where we are indeed in a conundrum as to who we're going to accommodate for both performers and audiences at any given time. And because access is unfortunately at so much of a premium, people are often faced with choices as to who they're going to accommodate. And I would love to live in a world where we don't have a scarcity of access anymore. And I feel like we are working toward that world. I specifically feel like the people in this space are working towards that world, but we're not quite there yet. And we need to keep pushing in that direction. For me personally, with my Bodies of Work upcoming project, what I'm exploring is work while meeting my own access need, which has been more and more difficult for me to find recently as someone with an immunocompromised system, dealing with COVID being ongoing while the world has moved on and most places are not taking COVID precautions anymore. So I'm very happy that I was able to find a way. I'm coming to you from my home right now. However, we do have the conundrum here that streaming access is not universal, not socioeconomically, and not as far as access needs. So while I was coming up with a streaming performance idea, I also stopped to think, who does this leave out of the room? Who does this leave out of the audience? And how can I serve the people that this does not serve? I think that an issue that we run into, and I can understand it, I have that issue as well, is trying to preserve exactly the same experience for everyone despite their access needs. And I don't think that that's necessarily the right choice to make in every circumstance. We can most certainly visually give visual descriptions to objects. We can definitely come up with ways to describe experiences and describe objects in ways that give sensory information that someone might not be able to access. But I stopped and thought, what if everyone doesn't have exactly the same experience, and that's okay? What if I make something for the people who are able to easily stream and view something? What if I make something for people who will be primarily accessing my work by listening? What if I make something for people who can't access streaming and who get visually overwhelmed with screens, by making there be objects that they can engage with in person somewhere else? So to that end, I am going to be doing a streaming performance, but I am also going to be creating some visual art pieces that are going to be set up in a gallery exhibit on location. And at that exhibit, there are going to be things that you can touch, and there are going to be things that you can look at, and there are going to be things that you can hear, and there are going to be things that you can read. And they're not necessarily all going to be the same things, because I feel like all of my audiences are a little different, and the primary ways in which they engage with art and the world are a little different. And that being okay with that is a big step in crafting access. So everyone will be able to access something that I'm doing. It just may not be exactly the same thing. Now, this doesn't mean I'm not making any effort to offer accessibility with my main performance. And this doesn't mean that I'm not going to create multiple, I call it axes of access, in dealing with the things that are going to be in a location, but it does mean that it's not necessarily the primary focus. I arrived at this because I think that it can be a powerful thing to look at the ways in which access conflicts and to come up with creative solutions to work that conflict into the art and to embrace that conflict. I do think that we can create access for everyone, but I think that it takes a multitude of voices to do that and a multitude of inputs to do that. And being one person who is creating work, I know that there are still going to be places where I'm going to misstep and places where I'm going to leave gaps. But what I plan to do with that information is to learn from it and to take it into the next thing I create, and then to pull in more axes of access into that work. Because it's, I believe, an educational experience to learn where access was not provided or could have been provided better. And that there is access that should simply be standard. We should be at a point where captioning is standard. We should be at a point where ASL interpretation is standard. We should be at a point where audio description is standard. And we should be at a point where basic physical access, by which I mean flat entries, automated doors, elevator lifts, are standard. We're not there, but that's a goal. And I think that if we are providing all of that access to audiences and artists, then we are fine-tuning access from that point to these interesting places where you still end up with clashes and conundrums and trying to figure out where is the access point for everyone involved in this. Can we get to one point? If we can't get to one point, what are the things that we can do to make a bridge and to fill in those gaps? And I think that there is very rich creative opportunity there if we look at it as a stepping stone versus a stumbling block when one of these issues does come up. I think that a big problem I've seen over and over as an artist trying to participate in the non-disabled world is people deciding that access is difficult, and because it's difficult and it's too much trouble, that they're just not going to have it. And that's not something that I like to let go on my watch. I am, in my role as a disability rights advocate, pretty noisy about not letting people get away with that kind of thing. I do sit on a lot of boards and committees that are access focused, and they can be difficult and frustrating to deal with. But I often end up in a situation where I feel like if I stop giving this my energy, nobody is going to be giving this their energy. And then there's just not going to be access for this. And maybe this particular event may not matter to that many people, but the practice of access does matter, and the right of disabled people to participate in public life as much as possible does matter. And therefore, I just get like a dog chewing on a bone and don't let it go. And I keep bothering people and I keep making noise about it. And I keep fighting for that kind of access. When you don't see me making art, that's usually what I'm doing. I would like to take a moment and ask if there is anyone in attendance who has dealt with these sort of conundrums I speak of, when there was a certain kind of access provided for, but they still found an event, exhibit, etc., inaccessible to them, and what that was like, and if anything came of it. So I'd like to open up the floor.
This is Margaret speaking. While people are thinking maybe it takes some time to put in the chat, I have 100% so many examples from my own experience. Um, I think one of the most, I don't know, Terri, though, if this is exactly the kind of conundrum situation you're trying to think about, but like I'll just share the first thing that came to mind. Um, the year was 2007. I was at the Society for Disability Studies conference, which is like extra ouch because it's a disability focused space. They had captioning. The captioning was on a screen on one side of a large ballroom where they were having, the biggest meetings. And the speakers were on the other side of the ballroom where they were having the biggest meeting. So my experience was of needing to decide whether I wanted to look at the speakers or the captioning across the room. Um, and yeah, it was an interesting thing because it was one of those things where you put it really well, Terri, this idea that access is difficult made me think of how the flip side of that for me has been you're expected to be grateful when there is access. So I definitely found myself in this space of being like, okay, yes, there is technically access, but the setup doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And I feel like I'm probably going to get a lot of weird emotional stuff, like have to do a bunch of emotional labor if I complain about how this doesn't make any sense and it's a really inconvenient version of having my access needs met. Um, anyway, that was the first thing that occurred to me.
Thank you, Margaret. I think that that was actually a really great example. I do think that a lot of times people do feel like they've checked all the boxes, but they don't really think through what the entire big picture is. And this is one reason that I've been doing a lot of pushing for organizations that have access consultants and access doulas, that they really need to have disabled people in those roles, and a lot of them don't. And I think that that is really doing those organizations a disservice and also doing disabled people a disservice, because I probably don't have to tell people in this room about, the lack of representation of disabled people in the workforce in roles that are specific to us or should be specific to us. And I started a little bit of a ruckus a few years back because I was invited to speak to some coalition of theaters. I am primarily a theater actor, or at least I was before COVID, but that's a whole other tangent we will get to in a bit, where people were asking, what they could do as far as serving the disabled community representationally. And I asked why they weren't hiring disabled access consultants and access doulas, and people froze up and they were like, well, people have to go through these programs and have this training. And when we put out our job descriptions, that's just not who we get. And I was like, okay, let's think this through. You realize that disabled people work on finding and securing access for ourselves pretty much every day of our lives. And that you've got people with boots on the ground experience that is completely relevant experience to these positions that just may not have a piece of certification on paper, but they know how to do the work because they do the work every single day. I've run into a similar thing, and I won't go into gory detail here, but having a conversation with a nurse who was a trained nurse and had been doing a specific procedure for, I would say, 4 or 5 years. And I told the nurse that I had been doing the same procedure to myself for 45 years. And therefore, it would make me very happy if she would just let me do it for myself. And I really think that that's the sort of way that you need to look at that sort of thing. I do think that if they had had a deaf person designing that access, that that's not something that would have been the final result. Does anyone else have any examples?
Hello, this is Donna. There's one right here. Can you all hear me? I'm at the DCC watch party. I can go in front of the camera. See me. Hi, Terry. Thanks so much for joining us for this conversation. It's been so enlightening. The example I wanted to share was that I had volunteered at this really cool social justice conference, and I was like assigned to like the access team for a dinner, okay? And they told me all I had to do was make sure anyone who had disabilities and wanted to sit at a more, at a table without a chair, make sure they found the space that was assigned for that and make sure they get there, okay? It seemed simple enough. Quickly, I realized the place they had assigned all the people with wheelchair or canes and things like that was in a very high foot traffic area. It was probably the most annoying area you could put someone with a wheelchair. It was pretty much right by the entrance to the bar and by the buffet. So a lot of the people, before I even brought anyone over there, I actually moved the signs and actually changed where people were assigned to sit because it didn't really make sense at all. I kept trying to tell people, don't stand by these tables, keep these seats free. But people kept standing where the wheelchairs were supposed to be, where, people would be able to wheel up to their seat. They saw those as standing tables, basically, and would rest their drinks and things like that and would not save the spots. And I ended up putting the disabled people, anyone with a wheelchair, a cane, who just asked for access. I actually ended up putting them with the same people who were quote unquote VIP, right? On a whole other floor where they had a balcony view. And I could have asked, but I thought if I ask, it's going to be kind of implying that the people in charge know what they're doing, but I knew it was going to make people feel more comfortable to have an entire floor of space, have tables at their height, they can feed themselves instead of waiting behind people for the bar all night. And there was only 3 people with wheelchairs, but they were so grateful. They were like, it was going to take us so long to eat, so long to drink, so long to do everything if you had not moved us, right? And shown us where the elevator was, which also wasn't obvious. But that was just an example of like, I was assigned to do something, but what I was assigned to do was like nonsensical. Like it didn't make sense if you're actually in a wheelchair. They were in the least ideal spot for eating and seeing and even getting to the bathroom. Like, but yeah.
Thank you, Donna. Yeah, that's yet another thing that to me falls under the what happens when you have non-disabled people trying to create access without seeking out the advice of a disabled person or having had experience creating access themselves before. I know that one issue that comes up a lot is because as disabled people, we can stumble when trying to provide access for people who don't share our disability because we focus so hard and have to focus so hard on carving out access for ourselves and making sure that our own access needs are provided for, that we often create the conundrum of taking away access from a different sort of disability than our own while we're creating it for ourselves. I have an example of me doing this once. I lived for a long time in Austin, Texas, and I was a member of the poetry scene there for a long time. And Austin has a big international poetry festival. And I had been fighting with the poetry festival for several years to let people know what the access situation was at the venues that they sent the poets to. Because the first year that I was published in the anthology and given a reading slot at the festival, they booked me in a space that was up 3 flights of stairs with no warning. So I show up, find out there are 3 flights of stairs, and at this point I did not have any orthotics, and that's a lot of stairs for me even with orthotics. And I ended up angrily reading my poem from the foot of the stairs and then leaving. So going forward, a couple of years later, I'm still in the scene. I'm in an anthology again, and I was on a roster with another person I knew to be mobility disabled, and they had us in a place that was stairs with no elevator again. And I ranted and railed and complained, and they moved us to a place with an elevator. And so I show up and I'm happy and I'm there and I do the reading, but the other person wasn't there, and I knew her and I didn't understand why she wasn't there, and I was worried she had been ill or injured. And when I contacted her and asked why she wasn't there, she said that place had absolutely no parking and there was nowhere for me to put my accessible van, and I drove around it in circles for half an hour, gave up and went home. And I'm a non-driver, and I never considered how bad the parking situation was, only that the place had a flat entry automated door and an elevator. So I solved my access problem, and I solved hers on paper as far as I was concerned, without realizing that she had another area of access that needed serving that was not served by moving to that location. So it's something it's a lot of work. It's really burdensome to think, okay, how many sorts of access am I creating here? Am I taking any away? What am I taking away? And is there anything I can do about it? And well, that's why my performance is a performance, but also a gallery exhibit. And I am also going to make my performance available to stream later because I believe in Crip time and I believe in Crip space. And I know that everybody who wants to be there live can't be there for various reasons, be they economic, as in you have to work, or physical or mental, you're not in the headspace at the time, you're having a flare, you just can't be there, your sense of time is not working. I hear all that, so I'm trying to accommodate that. But I'm still probably going to leave something out or make some missteps. And I think that that's something that we all have to accept. But instead of throwing our hands in the air and deciding there's nothing we can do about it, I think that we take it as information to make things better in the future, or we take it as an opportunity to see if we can create something in that space that we've accidentally created. Another thing that I'm doing with my performance, and really with my whole 3 Arts Fellowship, is working sometimes synchronously and sometimes asynchronously, with a whole lot of other disabled artists. And we're all doing this remotely. Some of us are doing it via email. There's been phone calls. There's been video chats. There have been Google Docs where we type things back and forth at each other. And these are all ways in which people can collaborate. And it can be challenging to find collaborators because people don't have time, don't have spoons, don't have equipment. So I've been exploring how many different ways can I collaborate with people. There may even be some people who I'm collaborating with by old-fashioned letter writing at this point, but it's still going to contribute to the overall project, and it's also probably going to spin off into different work that we continue doing together in the future. As a theater artist, I feel like something that's been going on forever, but more loudly during the pandemic, is inclusion for disabled artists has always been messy, and it's gotten messier since we've gotten rid of mask mandates because there are a lot of people for whom it's not safe to perform in person. And I do understand where we are at with the various unions and people's images being used and they're not getting paid for it. And I know that, we just had a whole lot of strikes and everything about that. But I feel like the solution to that is not to eliminate technology from theater, but to embrace it, to figure out where we can fit it in, and to compensate people fairly. So I've run into several conundrums with several different theater companies where they wanted to cast me in something, and I was like, well, I can't physically be there, but is there an offstage voice where I could record a voiceover or even log in every night and be there synchronously with you just remotely and speak my lines at specific times? There's actually an artist I'm working with in a longer term sort of sense in another state who has written a play that has a specific part that is going to be someone who appears on a screen. And that is something that's going to be mandated into production rights for the play, that there has to be this technology and that there has to be someone who cannot appear physically on stage or who chooses not to appear physically on stage, whose performance is entirely live streamed onto that screen. Actually, I know two playwrights who are doing that. And because I'm not union, I don't really know what the union rules are about that, and I don't know what kind of fight we're going to have to bring to make that be a thing that people can do going forward. But that's what I mean about embracing the technology instead of fighting it. I want to know really what we can do so that we can pull that in to what theater is, as opposed to saying, well, it's automatically not theater because there's a screen and therefore we cannot provide this access for you. So sorry, you don't get to have this career. You don't get to do this work. I don't think that that should ever be the answer. It should always be, what can we do? What can we sit down and agree to iron out this conundrum so that these people can work, so that these people are authentically represented, so that these people are brought in as opposed to further excluded. I would now like to take a brief break to ask if anyone has any questions or comments.
Hi, this is Joy. I just wanted to throw out there that I love like the creative, like generative process of this, like the way that like the approach to like trying to figure out how to include people is creating and pushing forms themselves. Like the idea that like somebody would appear on screen on stage, like is really captivating and interesting in a new way that like without this conundrum like might not happen, and like that as a disability aesthetic is just really interesting to hear about. And I was curious if there are like particular forms or things like that in your upcoming performance that like you're thinking about as disability aesthetics in response to that, or if you think about the whole performance that way, or like if you really deeply thought about it, or if it just was something that was intuitively happening, you know?
Okay. I want to say that the idea for the whole performance was conceived around my finding an accessible way for me to perform. So that's kind of the baseline part. But also, I do want to push a lot of boundaries about what makes something theatrical because, I got the Three Arts Award for theater. I'm not going to be appearing on a physical stage. I'm not going to be leaving my house. And a whole lot of people's response to that would be like, well, how is this theater? And my response to that is, well, let me show you. Because what I'm going to be doing for my live stream is technically a one-woman show. And it is something that is set up on a piece of furniture that is basically a stage set. So it's a stage play that's going to be on camera. And that is something that we do. People do, everybody goes super excited for like the National Theater Live. And that's an aesthetic that people have gotten really into recently. And I know that there were film plays before that, but I see people getting just super, super excited about National Theater Live in a way that I don't feel like I've seen that energy aimed at filmed plays in the past. And I'm like, so what's different about that? What makes people so excited for this? This is interesting to me. And why don't we have more of this? I also have challenged a lot of theaters who are in physically inaccessible spaces, and this was even before the pandemic, because of Chicago's storefront theaters, I think I found out that maybe a third of them are baseline accessible. Old, cheap rental spaces are often not accessible, and that's where storefront is. And that's why you end up with disabled performers not being able to build their careers and work their way up the way that non-disabled performers have. Lots and lots of people seem to be startled that I'm not union, and I've just always pushed back with where would I have had the opportunity? Not just as a physically disabled woman, but as a physically disabled woman of color who is not conventionally attractive. That's a lot of strikes to deal with the biggest one being the fact that I'm literally physically barred from 2/3 of the storefronts in this city. So the places where people go and get seen by casting directors and get seen by directors and get pulled out of those roles and into other roles are places that I don't have access to. There's also the really reductive point of view where people are like, yes, authentic representation, but that's where you stop. For us is sort of this token. I once had someone tell me that in the next time anyone in Chicago was looking for a Black physically disabled woman for a play, that they would automatically call me. And I was really flabbergasted that this person thought that that was a compliment. And they very much thought it was a compliment. And I was like, I am an actor. I have range. I can play a lot of things. I will be playing all those things in my body. But my challenge to you is, why couldn't the doctor, the mother, the ingenue, the romantic interest, the whatever in this play also happen to be a physically disabled Black woman? I think that the non-disabled world really doesn't like to think about the fact that we have lives. And that we have lives that are bigger than they realize, which is another thing that I'm doing with my performance, because my performance is about my disability without being about my disability. I think that a lot of disability art comes from this place of, I'm going to talk to you about my disability and try to get you to understand it. And that has a place, that is valid and that is valuable, but it's also something that I've done so many times that I wanted to do something different. So What I'm doing is going from a lens of, as someone who was largely shut out of public life and interaction because of my disability, here are all of the things that informed my world and my internal life and that made me be this person. So that's what I'm going to talk about, because that is about my disability without being about my disability, if that makes any sense. I had a fit of frustration at some point when I was talking about what I was going to perform, and I think I ended up saying something like, why can't I just tell you about the weird stuff that goes on in my head like anybody else does? But all of the weird stuff that goes on in my head is informed by my disability. And I think that that is an and not an either or. I think that that went a really long way from what Joy asked me. But I'm a lateral thinker. Let's just do that.
No, I just think that was a very like thorough answer to my question. Just that I don't feel like it was that far off. Yeah, it was good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just want to also say in the chat, Margaret jumped in to say, and its experience as a creative source, which I think very much is the case. So if anyone else has things they'd like to throw in the chat, questions, I'm happy to read them out loud if you are not comfortable or not in a place or unable to speak in your own voice, but you're also welcome to unmute or raise your hand if you're more comfortable doing that.
Hi, Terry. My name is Bree. I'm currently out walking my dog right now, so I apologize if there's any street noise. I just wanted to say that the work you're doing is incredible, and it's reminding me a lot of some work that a colleague of mine and I have been trying to start, which is like a series of conversations, particularly with like disabled artists or even disabled professors or disabled artists who are mentoring young disabled artists around this conversation of what we're calling incongruent access. So it kind of sounds a lot like the title of this, like Representational Conundrums, Incongruent Access. So when I saw this presentation, I was like, this is exactly what we're trying to talk about. So for one, I would love to have coffee with you or virtual coffee with you and talk more about this. But for us, it feels like it's like this conversation that the disability community is really ready for now. It's like this adding more flavor and nuance that goes beyond these like basic access needs that you're talking about. It's like recognizing that the more that we come together and build a culture, the more that we're going to run into these conundrums, as you say. And how do we both like hold, the reality of that and not try to just do everything perfectly and say that events are fully accessible, and how do we hold a stance of humility, honesty, while also doing as best as we possibly can and be as creative as we possibly can. We talk a lot about, how do we support disabled students or disabled young people when like we ourselves are disabled, and how do we meet our access needs when we're trying to support other disabled people. So just saying that this is a conversation that myself and others are having, and it's just great to hear your process as you think about these themes. And just thank you so much. Would love to talk to you more.
Thank you, Bree, and we should absolutely have that virtual coffee, because I feel like I want to pick your brain already.
Absolutely.
I do want to pick up one thing you said. I really, really wish that everyone would remove the phrase fully accessible from their vocabulary forever, because it does not mean what you think it means, you being the colloquial you, because it's not a thing. You don't know what everyone's access needs are on every level when you say that. No one ever does. You can say that you are striving to make the most accessible environment that you can and are trying to accommodate as many access needs as you are aware of. You should never say anything is fully accessible, because no, it isn't. By definition of it existing, it is not fully accessible to absolutely everyone in absolutely every way. It can't be. It's not possible. I don't know where that came from, but it needs to go away, because fully accessible is not a thing that we can do in that sort of quick pat. Oh, it's fully accessible because there's a wheelchair ramp, and we might have had an ASL interpreter or something. So it's fully no, it isn't. Stop it. Just stop it. I hate it so much.
We have a hand raised by Cherry. Can I ask you to unmute and go ahead?
Mhm. Hi, Terry. You know me as CK. So happy to see you. Yeah, thanks for this. Um, okay. Well, I had a question, and then what you just said about fully accessible, like just yes, thank you. It doesn't exist. What does it mean? And it shouldn't be the goal. And I think like too often when like that becomes the excuse to not make it accessible at all because people are like, well, there's no way it's going to be accessible for everyone, so we might as well just not try at all, so it becomes an excuse. The other thing that just bothers me so much is when people say that something is like ADA accessible, and I'm like, number one, I don't know what that means, and number two, what a low bar. So I kind of wonder, like, if you have a talking point for when someone says something is ADA accessible. And then, shoot, I really actually forgot the original question. But oh, yes, thank you for the language about conundrum, because language I sometimes use around this is like conflicting access needs. But I think that I appreciate what you're saying because it's not necessarily a conflict, or it's like one of those conflicts that's neutral but not negative, but it is a conundrum and it is an opportunity. And like I went to this, like retreat with disabled people, this like, and we for a whole day we didn't like do any of the work that we were like meeting to talk about and do because we had to strategize around meeting everyone's access needs. And so we spent the full first day just like figuring out how to solve the conundrums. And it ended up being like so beautiful. Um, but it took the whole day. And I guess I wish people would like realize that is what it takes. Like, no, actually creating access might not be straightforward or easy, but like, and even disabled people struggle to figure it out, and all these things. Yeah. Anyway, thank you for all the language.
Thank you, and thank you so much for being here. One of my mentors and dear friends, Barak Ade Soleil, has this access survey that they send out before doing certain things that I think is something that more community could adopt, because that way you know what access needs you're trying to meet before you do a thing, if at all possible. And it does pertain to the people who are specifically going to be there, but that makes more sense, I think, outside of the baseline access that we should be providing for absolutely everything all the time. I think that makes more sense than trying to just nebulously grab at straws of what you think might be accessible. And then, yeah, I also completely agree that this is too hard, we're going to just throw everything away because this is too hard, is something that we come up against over and over. And in the theater community, what I've challenged people to do is to stop wringing their hands about what they can't do and tell me what they can do. So I'm like, okay, fine, you're in a building upstairs. What are your assets? What do you have? Can you get an ASL interpreter? Can you get a captioner? Can you record this and stream it at some point? What can you do? Lead with that. We want to know what you can do. We aren't interested in hearing what you can't do at this point, because everyone can provide some form of access. And also, can you maybe partner with another space or another organization with a different space if space is your issue? That's another thing that you can possibly do. You just have to try. And a lot of what I feel like we run into is people either not trying or trying a bare minimum, deciding the bare minimum is too hard, and going back to the hand wringing. And I have been a hand wringer myself in the past because, once again, we have to work so hard on our own access that sometimes we run out of energy before we get to anyone else's. But this is an effort to be better than that because we can be.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, we are running a bit towards the end of our hour here. Does anyone have anything in closing before I close us out?
I have a question. If no one else does, I want to make sure other people have a chance. I know I've spoken several times. Good. Anyone? Okay. Um, I am really curious about how you feel about like dealing with the space where people may not know what their access needs are. Like they might be aware of the barrier, maybe, and maybe not even that. So I was curious if you have any insight or experience, like personally, or that you could speak to as an artist in particular, about that sort of nebulous space of like, also there are so many people who either are or aren't disabled, who just don't have that language of like knowing what they need, knowing they need to access help, like knowing they might need like those things to make themselves be able to be present.
I mean, one thing like Barak's survey really broke things down. And I really admired it for how it broke things down. Like, it didn't just ask if you had a general disability or general basic need. It broke things down as far as, auditory. Here are all of these different blanks that could be, something auditory that you might have to deal with. Visual, here are all of these different things. Tactile, sensory, mobility, and broke it all down. So I think it's kind of a little bit of the responsibility of those of us who have the language and can break it down to provide that language to people and help them navigate it. There is also access doula-ing, for lack of a not knowing the grammar around that, of having, people on hand to help people if they end up having a moment and need assistance that they didn't realize that they needed, just to have someone on hand who can help them navigate that. Because we do get new information about our bodies all the time and about our psyches all the time, and we may not know until something happens, but just having someone there who can help people process that and deal with that is really valuable. And that's another thing people should be investing in. And thank you for that question. That was really good. Well, I very much appreciate everyone's presence today. I hope that you got something valuable from this. I definitely have gotten some value from connecting with all of you wonderful humans in this space. Thank you so much for your time, your contributions, and I hope that you will get a chance to witness my work in process when it is presented in December. And thank you all really so much.
Oh, thank you so much, Terri. I just spotlighted myself again. This was such a great conversation. I enjoyed it so much. I will echo your thanks to everyone for joining us. If you could, please, we'd love to hear what you thought. Joy just dropped a link to a feedback form in the chat. That helps us on any number of levels, just like knowing the kind of programming that people are really looking for, making a case for our funding, that kind of thing. So yeah, I will say thank you again to Terri and to everyone who joined us. And thank you to our access workers. We appreciate your labor. Thank you to Joy. Thank you to Dante. Thank you to everyone who made this possible. Okay, I think that's it. And I will wish you all a good night and close the Zoom.